Good evening, I'm Felix Gaehtgens with Koppinger & Kohl, talking to you from European Identity Conference 2009. And I have with me Babak Sadighi, CEO and co-founder of Axiomatics, a company specializing in authorization and access management with a policy server that implements the XACML standard. Babak, can you tell us a little bit about authorization, specifically with role-based access control? Now, some people are saying that we might need to get beyond role-based access control, that we might eventually hit a wall if we continue where we're going, and especially when requirements get much tighter than they are now. What do you think?
Well, I think that role-based access control is an interesting, well-defined and well-designed mechanism. But what we see is that roles by itself, or defining access rights in terms of roles, only in terms of roles, won't get us to the fine-grained authorization models we are looking for, and we won't be able to capture all kind of scenarios in terms of roles. If we try to do that, we will get role explosion, and that is what we have seen in many projects out there that have failed because of the number of roles they have to capture in order to be able to cover all type of scenarios.
So what would be the alternative?
Well, I think the next step, or the new way of doing access control, is to go for attribute-based access control, where roles are seen as one type of attribute, but not the only one. So you can capture a context, you can capture a scenario in terms of the attributes of users, attributes of the resource, and also the environment. In that way, you can specify the context where access rights should be granted.
You've implemented a large project with the Swedish National Health Institute, right? Can you give us an example of how ABAC actually works versus RBAC in this particular context?
Yeah, I mean, simply, if you define access controls in terms of roles, and you have a role of a doctor, medical doctor, that doesn't mean that a medical doctor can do everything in the system. It's very much based on the context, which patient it is, what time of the day it is, whether the doctor is at the office or not. All these matters when you have to decide whether the doctor should be granted or not. And that is what we see, that but merely using roles, or purely using your roles, you won't be able to specify all those kinds of scenarios. Whereas if you use attribute-based access control, you can use the role of doctor, but you can also add other attributes in the picture so that you can specify the context where this access should be granted or not.
You guys are using a standard called XACML. Can you just give us a quick overview?
Well, XACML is language for specifying authorization policies in terms of XML and in a standardized way. The standard is developed within OASIS, and it's not only a language for specifying the policies and structuring them, but also a protocol for querying and getting back the response in a standardized way. And also a number of reasoning mechanisms are also included in this standard. So I would say it's more than a language, it's a complete or is a framework or a kind of solution for specifying, reasoning, and enforcing access control policies or authorization policies.
I hear you've actually co-authored part of XACML, right? I have one specific question there for you. One of the requirements in systems is not necessarily knowing whether you are allowed to do something specific, but it's also, in a particular context, knowing what you're actually allowed to do. If you imagine, for example, that you have a panel with many different buttons and controls on it, and some of them are actually not accessible to you. So instead of going and querying each one of them, you need actually to find out what is Babak allowed to do. So how did you get around that problem?
Okay, let me first say that I am not the co-author. It's my colleague and co-founder of Axiomatics, Eric Rissanen, who is the editor of the standard, version 3. But to answer your question, yes, there is a problem with XACML, that in XACML you submit an access query and you get an answer yes or no. What we have done, we have implemented ways of doing reverse queries into the system, and you can also put queries such as what can John do, or who can access this resource, so you get the list back of those. Yes, so we have addressed that issue, and we have also, to mention yet another product that is called Policy Inspector and Policy Auditor, where you can actually do this kind of reasoning and do this kind of queries, and using a logical engine underneath to be able to reason and give back the answers.
Excellent. One last question for you, one last technical question. The XACML standard defines a policy decision point and a policy enforcement point, which are two logical components that talk to each other. Now, I would think that in most environments, when you have so many authorization queries going back and forth, that this probably wouldn't scale very well if these were really two completely separate components deployed in a network. So does it make sense of combining them?
It does. I think that we will see all kind of possible scenarios or implementations. We see in certain applications, for certain cases, a closely coupled PEP and PDP are necessary. It can also be the case that you have a central PDP supporting several other PDPs that are closely coupled to the applications together with a PEP in order to scale and in order to raise the performance level. So what we will see in the future is kind of a hybrid type of solutions, both decoupled PDP, PEPs, but as well closely coupled ones, but also in the same architecture or same infrastructure, all type of combination of these things. That's what I believe, yeah.
Excellent. This is your first EIC. You're going to be on a few panels for the coming days. Is it going good for you so far?
Definitely. I have to say this has been a very, very great day. The conference is very interesting. I had a chance to go to a couple of presentations, very good, and people seem to have a good time here. So I'm very, very pleased to be here.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Babak. It's been great talking to you. Enjoy the show.
To be honest, it's very, very